and welcome to The Lodgers, Sordid Cinema's Twin Peaks podcast. Apologies for the slight delay in getting the show up this week, but there's been a lot happening. I had to move, new setup, getting set up. It's a whole thing. If anything sounds different or is in any way inferior, I apologize. I do, of course, as always, have Kate Rennebaum here.
Hello.
Joining us again, you might recall if you were listening to the original run of episodes that our first guest, post-pilot, was Justine Smith. And for symmetry's sake, here she is again.
Hi, thank you so much for having me back on the show. I'm really excited.
Yeah, to be clear, it's just for symmetry.
No. What? Simon, don't listen to Simon.
No, it's because you're great, and we're very happy to have you. I just wanted to quickly say, as I sometimes feel the need to, thank you again to everyone who's reached out on Twitter and via iTunes ratings and reviews about the show. It's a massive motivation factor for Kate. As for always, I motivate purely out of spite. Seriously, it's great to hear, and I want to thank everyone for their kind words. A couple of people were a little bit happened to mention that they were a little bit upset with us over our late season 2 coverage, but they did understand. They were happy that at least we sped through it quickly. So we thank you for your understanding, and we hope that if we happen to be a little bit critical in the future, that you'll stick with us regardless. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to mention, because I just think it's just cool as hell, is Kate, you recently got a new job posting. I just needed you to pimp that out for us for a moment.
Yeah, I will still technically be finishing my PhD next year, but in the fall, I will be teaching a course in French cinema at MIT, which I'm very excited about. So,
oh, sorry, could you remind me quickly, where are you doing the PhD?
Jesus, I'm doing it at Harvard University, which, hopefully gives me enough creds to be able to run a podcast about Twin Peaks. I think it does. I think it means that I hopefully could get away with this. It's good.
I don't know if anyone at home knew this, but occasionally in some interactions with people online and like the pop culture sphere, people can be a little bit condescending when you're of the female gender. I don't know if anyone's ever heard about this phenomenon before, but
it doesn't exist. Okay.
Actually, Justine, since you're here, you're the only person I know, that I personally know, who's verified on Twitter. So congratulations for that. That's basically like going to Harvard.
I'm literally famous now, and I can tweet at brands, and they give me stuff.
Nice. Has that actually happened?
Awesome. No, that's not true.
You had me convinced. You should have just said that. Now people would have started doing that now.
Oh, shit. Okay, I'm gonna start. I'll get back to you. Next season, next time you have me on, I'll update you on all the free swag I got by tweeting at them.
All right. We should probably get to Twin Peaks because there's a lot to talk about this week. Part 5. The log line for this episode, by the way, is simply case files. I don't know if anyone's been paying attention to the episode descriptions that Showtime's been putting up, but it's been remarkable to me to go back and look at them to see that, oh yeah, those actually do map one-to-one to what's in these episodes in like a vaguely descriptive way. And indeed, case files does relate quite cleanly to this episode. I want to start with you, Kate, because you've just had the liberty of rewatching it, which I haven't had the chance to yet. So we get a few more returning characters this week, some of whom we've seen already, some of whom we had not, some of whom it had to be explained to me after the fact were actually returning characters and I didn't know, but we'll get there later. Yeah, there's a lot in this episode, as well as a continuation of some of what we've already had. I mean, I guess my first question is, how do you feel like we're starting to see a shape, like a recognizable form that this is taking, that we might extrapolate to imagine what the rest of this is like?
Do you mean sort of like a plot-wise, or in terms of kind of formal aesthetic quality-wise?
Anything. Do you feel like we're starting to draw a map here?
So you're basically just asking me, can you make sense of any of this?
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. I think it's interesting, like a lot of the way that people have been responding to this particular episode is everyone is very pro it. I don't think I've read any reviews that have been sort of negative about the most recent episode. Everybody is pretty gung-ho about it. But there is a lot of stuff that's starting to come out, which is people being a little more maybe hesitant about the Dougie stuff, like just wondering how long the Dougie stuff is going to go on for. And so it's funny because for me, I feel like people are starting to, it feels like people are sort of saying, well, once the Dougie stuff is over, then that's when the show is really going to start or something. And I feel like that's a bit of a dodge. And I would personally want to push back against that a little bit, because for me, I think the Dougie stuff is so perfectly of a piece with everything else that's going on here. And I think, in terms of plot stuff, I suppose I haven't really thought exactly about how, if there is a shape that's becoming clear to me. I mean, for me, I feel like every scene I'm completely engrossed in, despite the fact that even in this episode, again, despite the fact that we have returning characters both from just this season and previous seasons, despite that prevalence of returning people, it still often feels like every new scene opens up something new rather than builds on something we already had, right? I mean, that it still feels at this point, 5 episodes in, like every 2 out of 3 scenes, or maybe every 3 out of 4 scenes, feels like a new direction rather than a kind of continuation of what we already have, which I love. Like, I'm up for the ride. Like, I don't need it to kind of be honing in on something just yet. So I'm fine with that. But yeah.
Now, Justine, we haven't gotten to talk about the new season at all yet. How are you feeling about all this? How are you feeling about it as a phenomenon that is, like, kicking around our world? How are you feeling about the conversation around it, and how are you feeling about the show itself?
I'm actually really, really, really loving it. Way more than I ever expected, especially since I think while it's giving you a lot of what you want, it's really its own entity from the original series. I know that I tweeted a lot before the show even aired that I was really worried about the conversation that would kind of be swirling around it. But it's really not as bad as I expected. Maybe because the show was not what I expected it to be. I do feel that you have a lot of the commentators who are trying a bit too hard to make sense of everything when it's very clear that it's really in the developmental stages. I think there's a lot of joy in that. I know I can see how it can be frustrating for some people. But I think every scene, every moment, I just find is so wonderful. I think this episode was the first time that I started to have my own kind of apprehensions, just because it does feel kind of like I kind of what Kate was saying, that it's opening up more things, and we're already at episode 5, but it's just the visuals, the atmosphere, and the characters. I'm really just loving every moment of it.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, this episode is where, when I had sort of my initial vision of what this might be like, this 18-part movie, or this 18-hour movie, as Lynch sort of put it, I sort of had this abstract vision of what that might entail in terms of, like, narrative drive and how it might connect to previous aspects of the show. And I think this week is where I have to start to let go of that idea. I think it's interesting that people, I forget whether this was Lynch or Frost who said this, but they've actually said that this may not be the end. That there might be an openness to more episodes. And I think just the fact that there's an openness to it suggests that we're not going to get the kind of sort of drive and finality that one might expect out of the fact that, this is coming so much later and so many of the returning actors are so old. And Lynch, let's be honest, is no spring chicken either, nor is Frost. And despite that, it's not being seen, nor, it seems, was it produced as any kind of last hurrah, although it does have these culminating elements, which I'm sure we can talk about. So I feel like my understanding of what this is going to be sort of evolves a little bit, or will evolve a little bit every week. The other thing is my perception of how this is evolving is so out of whack from watching 4 episodes in one day and then getting 1 episode 2 weeks later. So
I had the same experience.
Yeah, it's extremely, everything about this is disorienting. For me, this, I mean, I don't know whether if it was the least of the 5 episodes. It's difficult to like rank these things in a really explicit way. But I will say that it felt like an episode that had these 3 or 4 really outstanding or like particularly memorable elements or scenes or sequences, and then the rest was pretty much more of what we've seen, slightly elaborated on. That's how it felt to me anyway. I haven't had the chance to rewatch it like you have, Kate. Maybe we should start with Dougie, and I want to give a quick shout out to the writers and watchers over at the ILX message board, one of whom just said something that blew my mind, which is connecting Dougie to the Douglas firs of Coop's imagination, which had not occurred to me. And that blew my mind a little bit. That's the sort of like semi-subtle connection that I want to give. I feel like I want to credit that specifically to Frost.
I feel like this episode, for me, is one of the episodes that makes me feel like in the past I've maybe been a little harsh on Frost. I mean, I feel like this is an episode where he really, the presence of the kind of like writerly elements of Twin Peaks really comes to the fore, and I think in the best way. I mean, it's interesting, Simon, to hear you say that you thought this was maybe one of the episodes that might fall towards the sort of bottom or something. For me, I think if we were just ranking them, I would put a lot of this episode above aspects of the previous episode. But I think that there's already an interesting tension there in the fact that so many of the things that work really well in case files shine a light backwards on some of the stuff that didn't work very well in episode 4, and maybe lend at least some credence to this idea that some of the things we didn't like there, like the way the Tammy Preston character was being treated, or even some of this stuff around Hawk and his relation, like these lines around Hawk needs to look at his heritage and all of this stuff, like maybe being a little ishy. I feel like it works so well, like those kinds of similar dynamics work so well in the most recent episode that it very much renews my faith that what was going on in episode 4 was at least part of a larger scope in which it could be read as kind of at least sort of self-critical or at least aware of some of those problems. I don't know. How does that strike some of you guys?
I do see what you mean, but I think like the whole problem with the whole series though is, especially like there's kind of this conflict or tension between the idea of it being a television show in the same vein as the original series and the kind of idea of David Lynch or someone else saying like this is just an 18-hour movie. And if it's an 18-hour movie, this is like the first 15 minutes of a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know if we're fully equipped to kind of deal with the kind of repetitiveness of the first act stretched over 5 hours. Like, not that it's good or bad. It's just, it's not the normal television thing. And are we giving it too much leeway for like the way that it structures itself, or the way that it seems to sometimes not be moving forward, or the things that don't quite make sense and kind of feel like a conceit. Like, I kind of agree, like the last episode, the heritage thing bothered me a little bit. Yeah. Although this episode, you're right, like I actually completely forgot that was something that kind of popped into my head, because it was, I had no problem with it at all, the way that it's kind of moving forward or not really moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the sequence with Hawk and Andy that happens late in the episode, where it's a long take and there's no dialogue, and then at the end, Andy says, "I'm looking through these files." He says, "There's no Indians anywhere. There's no Indians anywhere," and Hawk says, "No, there isn't." And it's for me, it's like that's a much sort of clearer example of Frost and Lynch as well, obviously, like writing this in a way where there is an acknowledgement of Twin Peaks' relationship to like the colonial history of the United States, and that being a theme of the kind of show this year. I mean, I think that is a good example of that working. It works maybe less well in some of the other ways that it's been used in the past, but again, I thought it worked really well here. I don't know, for me, like that question of whether we're giving the show a lot of leeway around its pacing and stuff, as we don't know where it's going to go later and how these rhythms are going to develop. I mean, of course, it's totally fair because we obviously don't know where things are going to go. But for me, it's been interesting because I personally don't feel any I'm not annoyed at all by the pacing or like by the lack of things being completely clear. I actually find it very fascinating how interesting it is to read different people's reviews at the end of the show and see how differently people read like basic plot stuff, because Lynch and Frost leave it so open where it's like one scene connects to the next scene and the way that those things make sense is read completely differently by different people because the show's so uninterested in sort of being very like clear about basic information. Like, for example, I read one review that talked about the car sequence in this episode where there's the guys who are trying to kill Dougie and then this other crew that shows up in the black vehicle. One reviewer read that as the second vehicle was like another set of assassins that had also been hired to like kill Dougie or kill the first assassins. And I was like, well, I don't think that's true at all. They're obviously just car thieves. But I mean, what do I know? I don't really know that. And then, for example, as well, at the end of the episode with, when Evil Cooper calls, he calls into the phone and says the cow has jumped over the moon. And 4 minutes later, you cut to another scene in Buenos Aires and the little box disappears. I did not at all put together that was like a result of Coop calling because there was so much sort of space between those scenes. It wasn't until I read other people talking about it later, I was like, oh, Coop blew this up. Anyway, that's maybe rambling, but yeah.
Well, speaking of things that we didn't figure out until later or whatever, I didn't figure out until 5 minutes before we started recording this podcast that the employer giving Caleb Landry Jones a hard time is Mike.
Oh, you didn't figure that out?
No.
No, I had to read about it too. I didn't make the connection at all.
Huh.
Which, yeah, I didn't know he was returning. They do so little with his character. Like, they do a little bit more with him, like, near the end of season 2 with Nadine, but I'll be extremely curious to see if they get a scene together at some point.
Oh my god. Oh, that would be uncomfortable, I expect.
They're just, again, like, there are things that I haven't had time to dig into that I'm just fascinated to discover. Speaking of things I was fascinated to discover, the one sequence that I need for us to dig into in a major way is the Jacoby sequence.
Oh, it's so good.
Actually, the Jacoby and Nadine sequence, technically, since this is the first glimpse that I can recall that we get of her in this new season. We've already talked about this new season in terms of this. You could have predicted it through line of aging, decay, and death. And what I find so fascinating about there's a lot of things I find fascinating about the Jacoby sequence. First of all, and again, I agree with you, Kate, that a lot of what's good about this episode, I feel like I want to credit specifically to Frost. The way that they're able to bring Jacoby into the 21st century is really effective. And the turning him into this like Alex Jonesy type, I feel like on paper it could be really hackneyed, but credit to Russ Tamblyn and credit to Lynch's like direction and the editing, as well as that glimpse of Nadine watching, which I think does a lot, that it feels right for the character. It feels right based on what little we've seen of him, and these golden shovels, which we find out. I can't believe it's only a couple episodes later and we find out what the golden shovels are for. I felt like we were going to have to wait till the finale to find that out. The way that it connects that theme of decay and sort of bodily decline to what feels like this very zeitgeisty moment of governmental distrust and sort of alt-righty furor. I think somehow really, like, it also works on a character level, it works on a performance level, it works on a writing level, and it's also just really f***ing funny. And it had, like, there's been a few moments like this of things I just cannot imagine, not only on the previous Twin Peaks series, but even in another Lynch thing. Like the shot of the infomercial screen for the shovels, like that feels very new. And it also feels, and it feels a little bit like it connects to sort of the more absurd Adult Swim sort of style productions that have come out in the last few years that have sort of appropriated Lynchian aesthetics. So, I mean, I loved everything about that sequence. I don't know about you guys.
I loved it. I think that there were many scenes in this episode that sort of blew me away. I think the Jacoby one stands out as maybe at the top of that list for any number of reasons. I mean, it just is quite funny. Like, you're laughing quite hard through a lot of it, and a lot of that is Tamblin's just, I mean, his, like, complete over-the-top, freaking out and having to, like, take a breath to breathe. He gets so amped up. I mean, there are, Dr. Amped up. There are funny things there. But beyond that, I mean, I actually think it works really well at a larger level in relation to the show's own history, even what this episode is doing. I mean, this whole episode, there are many scenes that are very clearly about a certain kind of connection between the need for money, like this sort of organizing activity, everything around money, getting money, and then that being very clearly linked to a form of violence. I mean, there's a lot of this sort of sense of just kind of general desperation around the need for money. I mean, it leading to violence. And so I think there is already this sort of larger political sensibility going on there with that we've talked about in the previous episode. But it's then very interesting to get something that is so kind of on the nose politically, because it's not very common in Lynch's work to get something like, not at all, right? So something interfacing so directly with the kind of like political zeitgeist of the moment. So, and again, like maybe that is more from Frost's side of things, but it works so well here with Lynch's larger, like, political interest, I think, in the sort of affect of the current moment, which I'm trying to describe maybe as the lack of like the love elements in the current show that we used to get in the old show. The lack of these sort of spaces of like innocence and naivete and love are yet to be found here, really. And maybe one exception to that, an interesting exception, is a sequence I'm sure we'll come back to, but is Amanda Seyfried's moment when she's high on drugs, and you get this sequence of like ecstasy and joy, but it's tainted, right? I mean, it's coming from a very problematic space. So anyway, so that's all to come back to this. No, I mean, maybe not. I mean, she's having a good time, but it seems like there's worries around it. Anyway, we can come back to that. But all to say, like, the Jacoby stuff, I just think they nail it. And it raises some really interesting questions around things like, I appreciate the fact that the show seems to be looking in the eye things like, you know, Twin Peaks is probably a town where a lot of people would have voted for Donald Trump. And like, this show is like acknowledging that. I mean, I think that's really fascinating. And it's not necessarily doing it in like a didactic or judgy way. I mean, it is a little, because obviously you're supposed to get that Jacoby is nuts, but it's, I don't know. I haven't figured this out yet exactly. What do people feel about that?
I'm totally on the same page as you guys. I loved every second of it, and I love that there's kind of this weird build-up where you're wondering what the gold shovels are, and it kind of harkens back to the original series, the way that people are trying to figure out the grand mystery, and then it turns out to be an infomercial. And rather than feeling mocking, it just feels really playful, and yet there is that dark undercurrent because you kind of know the like real life parallels. My thing that I wanted to know is like, I do think it could easily come from Mark Frost or David Lynch or both of them. But you know that Lynch was really into the YouTube thing with his weather reports and whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, if he's engaging with YouTube, he for sure, if it's not Alex Jones, it's some of these other kind of like crackpot crazies. And like, even with like, Alex Jones is like a very evil man. Like, just on his, the Sandy Hook stuff. Like, there's a lot of problems.
No apologies to the Twin Peaks Alex Jones crossover crowd that may be listening.
Awful human being. But at the same time, you can see why someone like Lynch would be so fascinated by the performance. And same with Frost. Like, there's so much there. And what kind of works, though, is there's this element of pathos that, like, kind of is interjected, not necessarily through Jacoby himself, but through the engagement with the listenership. Yeah. I also think we have this kind of connection to the theme of electricity, the kind of passing of ideas and the engagement of culture with the individual, and how there's kind of this sometimes toxic relationship between the two, or like not necessarily toxic, it could be spiritual. And the other thing that I was really struck by, like the whole series so far, like there is clearly this question of identity, especially with Coop, who's kind of separated into these three people. A lot of the characters are not what they seem. And for me, Jacoby in the original series was kind of this character who wore a mask, or not necessarily a mask, but like a costume of a therapist, right? And he's just wearing a different kind of costume to kind of cover the fact that, like, he's kind of empty and, but seeking an attention and seeking love in a very disturbed way, as if he doesn't even understand what that quite is.
That's a really astute point, actually, I think, Justine, about Jacoby and the costumes. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I think it's great because I think it shows so clearly the intelligence of what Frost and Lynch are doing with that character now, in the sense of looking back at Jacoby, it's very clearly revealed that this performance of the therapist, and again, it wasn't a costume that always fit very well. As I commented on a lot in the earlier episodes, Jacoby was often really not a great therapist, in fact, a sort of horrifying therapist a lot of the time. But there was also this sort of larger thing around him, right, of this kind of new agey discourse of this sort of spiritualism, this like Eastern spiritualism stuff, as this sort of 80s, me generation, like middle class kind of hippie who's become this sort of like middle class figure, new agey spiritualist person. What's fascinating now is that you flash forward, 30 years almost, and Jacoby's like costume that he's putting on in terms of his like emotional, like an effective relationship to the larger world is now one of anger. Like that sort of like post-hippie thing, middle class thing has now become just anger. Like I actually think that's really fascinating because that's what's so fascinating about his speech and the way that it like reflects interestingly on this kind of Trumpism, like nationalist stuff where a lot of what's actually being said in the speech is just outright nonsense. Like he just lists these words that are crazy and then it's interspersed with things like, where are the police when you need them? And I don't want to swear because it'll make more work for Simon, but there's some truly great swearing bits in that speech as well. But anyway, the words are not like, he's not saying anything substantive. There's no like argument or claim or, saying we should do this or that. It's just anger. And I actually think it's quite fascinating, Justine, as well, that you pointed this out, that then Nadine, on the flip side of that, is this, you get these shots of her, like, smiling benevolently, and these pathetic shots, like, looking back at Jacoby. It's a very weird disconnect there. And I don't know yet exactly what it's doing, but I think it's doing something smart. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I was really worried about the prospect of sort of contemporary political discussion potentially creeping into this show because, as our guest Ethan sort of alluded to, Mark Frost seems to be very much like a standard issue milquetoast American liberal. Like I'm sure he's watching the Comey trial with like bated breath, hoping for articles of impeachment that are never going to happen. Just like really stuff that has no interest to me. For anyone who's not clear on this, like I'm very much more on the socialist end. And I've been delighted, in fact, to discover since starting this podcast that there is like real crossover between Twin Peaks fans and American socialists.
Yep.
So that's been like just delightful to discover. Shout out to y'all. But I have to say that like, the Jacoby sequence is just masterful for the way that we have to consider that like when this was being written and produced, obviously none of it was happening after the election. It was all very much pre-Trump getting elected, but that doesn't diminish the fact of these obvious divisions and this political alienation that, essentially half or over half or just under half of America feels from the political process. And having Jacoby, who's, as you say, his expertise has sort of always been questionable, and the way that dovetails with our current moment where expertise itself is sort of looked on with skepticism because, experts have gotten us where we are, and where we are kind of sucks in a lot of ways for a lot of people. And I don't know, I just find it's too early for me to know exactly if I'm going to like where all these things are landing over time. And this is, liking things as they develop over time and where we land with them in a positive or a negative sense. Like there's more to talk about that, like on that score, but with other things. But I have to say this sequence was extremely encouraging for me for like folding in contemporary or semi-contemporary concerns in a way that feels like it doesn't betray sort of the sensibility of the show, and B, it doesn't feel ham-fisted in a way I might expect from like other sort of American liberal writers.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there are other like big sequences here that make sense in terms of the kind of like political question around these new episodes.
I think there is. Yeah, it's the ongoing storyline with the little boy and his mom. I think like that was definitely like there's always been like drugs or like the insinuation of drugs, but I don't think that I think it's a direct reference to the crisis that's happening in the United States. I don't think it's just a cool thing that's happening. It's very precise.
I wanted to bring up the drug stuff as well, Justine, because I think it's been interesting. I actually find it. I'm not that on board with this thing that's been happening a lot in the recaps. Which again, I completely understand why, because these poor people have to write these recaps like in the middle of the night. They're due the next morning, so it totally makes sense that they might become a little homogenous with people picking up on the same things across them. But a lot of the response to the Amanda Seyfried character, who is playing Shelley's daughter, Becky Burnett, is that, she's this new Laura Palmer figure. She's this very clear reference to Laura Palmer and all of this stuff. And I mean, sure, I guess, like, there are kind of obvious links there at the beginning, but I also feel like a lot of that tendency to just sort of say, like, oh, this is the show redoing itself or whatever, or, the Caleb Landry Jones character, her husband, Stephen, is like a Bobby or Leo. I mean, for me, it becomes a way to not actually pay that close of attention to what is actually going on with the new characters. It's like, there are interesting connections, but I don't think it's all exactly the same either. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the Becky character in relation to people like the woman in the housing development is the idea that whereas in the old series, drug usage was almost all concentrated around Laura, and it in a lot of ways became, the drugs were always very much connected to like a very specific set of traumas that were being managed, like not even traumas, but like really horrible violence was basically leading to the need to use drugs as a sort of coping mechanism thing, and then it was sort of infecting outwards from that. Whereas here, we get nothing like that. There is no sort of like originary psychological events that are attached to this sort of drug use. Instead, it is just pervasive and destructive and like everywhere. I think that really relates to this larger sense of a kind of like just political, like depression and fear that's sort of very prevalent in the whole new show.
Yeah, and I'm kind of wondering about, there's been a lot of discussion about the musical sequences as well, but I find it fascinating that the Roadhouse is now like really hopping. It used to be this sparse local hangout that like, you can imagine yourself like driving across the US and like happening upon it, and just, it happens to be this like ethereal place that's 1/4 full, and there's this weird lady singing a weird song, and now it seems to be like full of dancing hipsters. The only thing that I don't buy about these sequences, by the way, is that the hipsters are actually dancing.
I know, there's no way that they'd be dancing to that Riley Lynch like jazz saxophone guitar riff. It's not gonna happen.
They're totally doing the standing still in that place. But by the way, I just have to say that the use of I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but the use of the Dirty Beaches guy, who's a Montreal musician, was really inspired. A really inspired choice for, and a really appropriate choice in a less obvious way than chromatics are for inclusion on the show. I also appreciated that it didn't end the episode, which, like, I was starting to get worried that they were going to do that every episode, and the fact that they didn't this week was like a huge relief for me. Anyway, this notion of sort of Twin Peaks maybe becoming somewhat gentrified is interesting. Again, I don't know if this is something they're going to do like an explicit thing with going forward, but I am kind of I'm kind of interested to see if it tracks anywhere.
Just for the people who are listening to this podcast, it's very hard to it's very different doing these podcast episodes than it was doing the old ones. It's quite interesting, actually, because I feel like the conversation is like the first time that we get to think about a lot of these things. It's not like there's sort of reading or writing out there about it, or people have had time to digest this stuff. So I'm like trying to think of off the top of my head how to get at that question. Because like the next thing that I thought of when you mentioned that, Simon, was this sequence with Mike Helgenberger and the Caleb Landry Jones character, Stephen. And Stephen is this sort of whatever he's supposed to be, like mid-20s guy applying for some kind of job in whatever place that's supposed to be. It's sort of this like unnamed kind of middle management-y, paper pushy type looking place.
Yeah.
And this guy's trying to get a job in it. And Mike is so offended because he's like failing to follow the kind of standard practices.
Yeah, he calls him in space just to ream him out for how crap his resume was, which, as someone who's put together some really crap resumes, it was quite an amusing sequence.
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time imagining like a scenario like that in the earlier season, right? Like in the earlier seasons, you know, you don't necessarily have people working like middle-level office jobs. I mean, unless I'm forgetting something very obvious, but it doesn't, that feels like yet another one of these sort of newer, very bland spaces that is kind of like occupying a lot of the visual geography of this new show, which I have found increasingly interesting. Like, for example, the Lucky 7 insurance place where Cooper works, with its like bizarre kind of open, you know, Las Vegas-y, I don't even know how to describe it, like open area in front of the building, and then the inside of the building. It's just these very bland office spaces, and again, it's like these new places that Lynch sort of finds and is able to just make them seem very weird and uncanny and unusual, even though they're by definition so bland and boring. I don't know.
So maybe this is a good place to talk about one of the actual predictions that people had about this season that I think have maybe come true, is this idea that this new season, in the way that the original series kind of riffed on soap operas, which it seems like this new series is not doing, just as a rule. In that way, this new show seems to be riffing on prestige TV. And you can pick up on a lot of that, if that is in fact a thing. Where, I mean, we can keep watching and see if it ends up being a through line or just something we imagined in some sort of over-reading of critical ideas haze. But specifically in this episode, I mean, we get a little bit more of the home that Jamie, what a weird name she has.
Janie E.
Janie E. And Dougie share. And it feels a lot like the homestead in Breaking Bad in terms of the immediate surroundings. It feels a lot like that New Mexico sort of open, like that open plain around a suburban area type geography. The entire feel of the Dougie plotline actually really reminds me of the Kevin Finnerty stretch of The Sopranos when, spoiler alert, Tony's in a coma and he imagines like another life for himself. It seems to recall that. I don't know if this was deliberate, but I have been thinking of it. The office environment makes me think of Mad Men, specifically like the elevator sequence really makes me think of that, and this like weird, this like ill-fitting suit. It seems to work almost as like a Mad Men parody. Again, I don't know if these things are deliberate, but they certainly don't feel connected to the original series. It's difficult to not want to connect that to some things that have come sort of in the recent past.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, but I think maybe I don't watch as much prestige television, so like most of the shows I have not actually watched in any. Like, I've watched some Breaking Bad, I've watched some Sopranos, I've watched almost all of Mad Men. And I definitely see the connections when people bring them up, but I'm not sure if it's deliberate or what the overall purpose is. Like, for me, like, the connection to the original series and soap operas felt a lot more streamlined. So if this is actually meant to evoke or to be making a commentary on prestige television, in particular those shows, I don't, at least at this point, I don't know why. It's not that your argument doesn't make sense. I think there's a lot of evidence to support it, but it doesn't make thematic sense. Maybe it's a problem in the show, or maybe it's just like a coincidence. I don't know.
I definitely don't think it's a problem. I mean, it feels like, if I had to guess, it just feels like Lynch and Frost having fun. Like, it feels like they know that it's been a long time, and they know that TV itself has changed a lot, and it feels like they're having fun sort of toying with the visual tropes of prestige TV. Again, I could be imagining all this. I could be drawing connections that weren't.
No, the other reviews talked about Breaking Bad, at least, for sure. I read a few that were touching on that, especially for this episode.
It's definitely there. I mean, even in the pilot, like everybody referencing things like Lost. I mean, for me, I felt a lot of X-Files here and there throughout.
X-Files. No, the cigarette pack.
Oh, totally, yeah, because it's the same brand. It's the cigarette smoking brand, man's brand, right?
I completely forgot about that.
No, I do think it's there. I mean, I think at this point, it's very difficult to tell, like as Justine gets at, maybe what's going on and the choice to do this kind of like referencing work. Because I think, maybe I said this on the last podcast, but like if the soap opera slash the kind of mystery genre were the two framing devices for the old show, you could always tell there that both of those were done with a very, like a sense of love. I mean, it wasn't that they were kind of condescending to those genres. They loved the genres, and so they were very much enjoying using them. And while I do think that's here a little bit, it's like prestige television right now is maybe, it's difficult to kind of conceive of those as something you might love in the same kind of way. And I do think that maybe what is going on that is interesting in terms of like them utilizing these tropes that are common to these sorts of things, it is again the way in which it sort of almost reflects back the bleakness that's pretty inherent in a lot of those kinds of shows now, right? I mean, these are not, I think if Twin Peaks were to be doing more of its sort of soap opera, like, you know, lovey-dovey kind of melodramatic stuff on this current television landscape, it would stick out like a sore thumb. So there's something very smart that they're doing here by kind of integrating into the kind of current landscape while maybe pulling it apart a little bit from within. I don't know.
Well, and there are moments in the show, in this new series, that are, I mean, there's lots of moments that are impossible to imagine on sort of on prestige TV, and one day we'll talk about whether or not this season counts as prestige TV. But you know, those moments of sort of these emotional ruptures, like that very clear callback we got to the original series in the previous episode with Bobby and the portrait, or in this episode when we haven't really talked about Dougie yet, which takes up the lion's share of this episode, so we really should. But the scene of him looking at Dougie's son seeming to well up in this like very overt display of emotion. The equivalent sequence on Mad Men would have featured John Hamm looking out into the middle distance wistfully, but like not in that overtly a tragic way. You can see them playing with that kind of emotional modulation.
Well, I think if you are talking about the show having a conversation with other prestige television, you can directly pinpoint the fact that why would David Lynch and Mark Frost create a series about the most bleak thing possible, if you go to the original especially, like incest, murder, all these really awful topics, and yet be whimsical and still have this kind of joy. What was it kind of is like a self-commentary. It's like, why does life have to be so bleak? Because a lot of these shows, even if they're funny or if they have these humorous elements, I do find there's an unfair bleakness in everything. When the reality is life is not like that, or maybe we don't want life to be as bleak as these shows make them seem.
Or sometimes it's bleakness that is almost like for an easy explanatory term, you could say like bleakness porn or something. Like it's too like it's
misery
cathartic
porn,
in the sense of it. Misery porn, yeah, that's the term. Yeah, it's like it's cathartic in the sense of it. It sort of like delineates the misery into an easily understandable box that you can sort of say, well, at least that's not my life. And again, we should all acknowledge that we're kind of like middle class white people. Like we are approaching this from a very specific set of things. I think there are many people who are living right now who would think that TV is probably not bleak enough. And so that, you know, like this is a ongoing question, but I do think that one point I wanted to add about this notion of like maybe what it's doing in terms of reflecting back sort of prestige television stuff, and I think Simon, you were kind of pointing towards this, is the way in which like Lynch, you know, just, and for us too, like masterfully and just single-handedly kind of shows how maybe aesthetically kind of straight or almost homogenous a lot of that prestige television making is, right? I mean, even the more unusual stuff like Mad Men, which, you know, we shall say no bad things about Mad Men because Mad Men is amazing. But like even shows like Mad Men, they still fall within a pretty like predictable set of kind of stylistic choices that you're going to expect from that show. Like it sets up its tone and then it follows that tone. Twin Peaks, it's like, you know, we can say things like, oh, well, Twin Peaks has these kind of stylistic modulations where it goes from like very funny to very dark in a quick moment. And it's like, it's often difficult to come up with like stylistic markers that you can explicitly name beyond those kind of vague descriptors, because it is so just like wacky from scene to scene. Like it's very, it's not, you know, so anyway, I find that quite interesting as well.
There's been so much more like visual aesthetic variation just in these 5 episodes than you get on, like, I also love Mad Men. I love Breaking Bad. I also love Better Call Saul. Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul have a very specific visual vocabulary. You know, they've got the GoPros or whatever hooked up to objects. They love those shots. They love these particular, you know, saturated colors. They love these particular types of music cues. They love to do cryptic cold opens. They love certain types of structures, etc. Mad Men, the aesthetic stayed pretty much identical pretty much the whole way through, with a few slight digressions here and there. But like Lynch is not interested in that kind of aesthetic discipline. Not casting aspersions on those series. I think they did great things for the form. But yeah, it seems like, deliberately or not, the new Twin Peaks is kind of structuring in these call-outs to these other shows. And I want to also mention True Detective, which I know that Lynch has watched because he's mentioned it, that I liked the characters, is what he said. And, you know, why
is David Lynch so fun to do impressions of?
I don't know. But I invite everyone who comes on the show to do a Lynch impression at some point. That includes you, Justine. I think it's because it's easy. I think that's why it's fun.
And there's like a wholesomeness to it. You don't feel like you're like mocking. It's like, out of love. It's a loving impression.
Lovingly mocking, yeah. Anyway, it's when you structure in these call-outs to these shows, it doesn't feel like the relationship doesn't feel obvious. And that's something I'm sort of going to, I feel like I say this, I'm going to be saying this every week with these new episodes. It's something I'm going to be keeping track of. Because I feel like this is the beauty of like covering a new this new season, is that I feel like every week we've still only, like, I think about shots like when Coop / Dougie gets like sucked through the electric outlet, and there's Garmonbozia and shoes getting lifted on the other side, and like there weren't any shots preceding it that looked like that, and there haven't been any shots since. And like that's amazing to me that that next week we could get something totally new, or the week after we could get something totally new from whatever we got in the week in between, is like extremely exciting. And even like very quick digression, but Kate and I are massive fans of The Leftovers, which is like to my mind one of the greatest series to have ever aired. And I think if you're a Twin Peaks fan and a fan of like Prestige or like auteur TV in general, you owe it to yourself to watch. Even The Leftovers, for all its like left turns and surprises and digressions and evolutions, still operated within a certain like frame of aesthetic and formal discipline, and it doesn't feel like those railings exist here.
No, I mean, I think one of the main ways that we could see it, and we haven't really talked about it yet for the new episodes, but is performance. Is again like Lynch's willingness to just push performance beyond what is acceptable on kind of current day television. And the sequences here where it's most noticeable, and again, I really loved the sequence, was the sequence with Doris Truman, Sheriff Truman's wife, like yelling at him in the office for, 10 minutes about things like, I'm not the bucket, and that I'm not going to wait for this to get fixed. And it's so sort of excessive as to be like almost meaningless, like the string of complaints from this woman. But for me, the performance style works. Like it's funny, but at the same time, because it is so extreme and it's so over the top, it reads as like you pay more attention to the kind of content of what she's saying in a certain way than you would if it was like a realist depiction where you feel like you're supposed to be reading the scene to understand like the psychology of this woman and her connection to Sheriff Truman and their history or something. You're not reading it at all for that. It becomes about like, again, it kind of becomes about the economics of their life together. Like her complaining about their car being broken, her complaining about the pipe being busted. Like all of these things stand out in a way that I think if the scene had been performed differently wouldn't have come to the fore. That was my one performance person I really loved. The other person I wanted to give a shout out to, and I'm embarrassed I didn't look up the actor's name, but is the guy who plays like Dougie's aide in The Office, the one who gives him the coffee and the one who sort of walks him around. He had a bit part on 30 Rock as like Liz Lemon's agent / a dog agent. Anyway, that actor, like, I just thought it was such perfect casting. Him as this sort of bumbling office guy who does things like tries to leave the boss's office but can't get out the door. I mean, I just thought all of that was great.
Since we're at this point in the episode, I wanted to mention, and I feel like, again, like so much of covering this new season is going to be zigzagging of like mentioning something I'm not sure about and then coming around to it a couple episodes later. But there are a couple of things in this episode I wasn't sure about, and I wanted to mention them. First of all, the first like bit of casting that I'm just not like, that kind of pulls me out a bit is Caleb Landry Jones.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought he was great.
Just because I've seen him in a few things, and he like, especially most recently, of course, and most famously in Get Out, which like he always plays kind of the same type of character, this kind of like dirtbag, over the top like creep. I'm sure he's a lovely man in real life, but it's very much what he gets cast as, and I don't know. It's like I had a difficult time imagining. Like I was thinking about. And I realized that, like, the lineage being depicted has maybe, like, questionable choice in men. But even then, like, I had a difficult time imagining, like, what the Amanda Seyfried character would have ever seen in this, like, over-the-top, like, Nicolas Cage and Raising Arizona, like, level screw-up.
It's funny that you mentioned Nicolas Cage, because for me, actually, Olivier came up with this comparison and I thought it nailed it. Was for him, he was like, oh, that guy, Caleb Landry Jones, he reminds me of Bobby Peru, who, for people who don't remember, Bobby Peru is the Willem Dafoe character in Wild at Heart, which is the
right,
Lynch
yeah.
film
Other
that
people
has
have
Nicolas
made
Cage.
that connection, yeah.
Oh, have they? Interesting. Okay, because
Yeah.
for me, that like they physically look alike, although realistically the character in that episode who maybe is the closest to Bobby Peru is the Richard Horn character who turns up at the bar at the end. This like character we know nothing about is just sort of horrendously violent to this woman. But anyway, for me, I get it. I could see the Landry Jones stuff. It worked well enough for me. I do feel like maybe we'll need to get a little bit more of that to really see how it is going to play out. But yeah, I don't know.
I guess what I'm missing is that, like, I feel like if we get one moment of him being like really lovely, it'll fix everything. But as long as he's just like this over the top, like gnarly, disgusting little man, like I'm gonna really struggle with that.
Again, this is like all extrapolating because it's clear that like they maybe got together under other circumstances and things have maybe changed or something since, but you could at least tell that he's like trying to be sweet to her in the car. It's just sort of failing.
Yeah, because he's Caleb Landry
creepy.
Jones.
He always looks like he's been like punched in the face and is about to develop a black eye, like every time.
And he always looks like he's deserved the punch.
I think that like makeup artists love his face because if you don't put makeup on it, he looks so nightmarish. And like there's very few faces that look that authentically awful. Like not that he's ugly, but his skin tone is so like transparent. So you have like those dark sunken eyes and that kind of grayish tint to his skin that like you can't really recreate. It's like he's born with it. I don't know.
As a side note, it's like why he works so well. The casting works so well in Get Out because it's like he's like whiteness to the point of grotesquerie. Mm-hmm. That guy, it's like whiteness to the amplified extreme.
Yeah, he's like the royal family.
Yeah.
Like literally, whiteness is a sickness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, yeah, it's very true. And okay, but since we're talking about like faces and crazy stuff, we haven't talked about this yet, so I wanted to get it on the table. Is for my money, I thought this was an amazing sequence. The sequence with Evil Coop in the
Yes.
in the jail. There's a ton of amazing stuff with Evil Coop in the jail, but we could start with the one with the at the beginning when he's in the cell and he goes to the mirror, and you get the cut back to the sequence from the finale of the first series with Coop and Bob, and it's cut really interestingly. I thought even that was just genius, this like recutting of it in almost a boomerang-y kind of way. And yeah, and then this amazing CGI effect with Bob appearing in Coop's face.
Yeah, this is another thing I find so fascinating about the new series is as much as it's willing to break from the past aesthetically, formally, etc., it can't seem to keep itself from these very explicit connections to specific plot and character points from the original season, from the original series. Like, I mean, obviously the Bobs, like we see footage from the original final sequence of the series. We get Bob appearing in the mirror. Elsewhere, because I'm only going to mention this because it relates to my specific point, we have a sequence of the new Sheriff Truman on the phone with the old Sheriff Truman, who we are reasonably sure is not going to show up on screen at all.
I'm like 100% positive he's not coming back, Michael Onkeen.
Yeah, so which is like it, and I think they know that we know that, and like them taking like a minute or two of our time to acknowledge his absence and like theoretically have him on the other end of that phone. Again, it feels like it's one of the few things about the series. Like, this is maybe something worth discussing, which is like that. The things like that, like having the old Sheriff Truman be off sick and having him off screen and like talking to him and having these one-sided phone conversations are very much like old school television. Like,
totally.
They're like very much, they're the closest thing we get to sort of soap opera style television of like having to work around a specific aspect of production. Whereas the rest of the show seems to have caught up more or less to the fact that it's in the prestige TV era. So the fact that there's like some things about the show that are still like creaky and old fashioned, I find fascinating. But to return to Evil Coop in jail, the mirror sequence is incredible, and I just want to I need to specifically give a shout out to Kyle MacLachlan for the way that with not a lot of dialogue between them, in fact very, very, very little, he manages to totally drive a psychic wedge between Evil Coop and Dougie. I mean, not to mention like regular Coop, who we have barely seen, if at all, in this new season. And like, it's remarkable that like the ostensible star of the show and a guy who we know so well, in terms of if you've watched Lynch things, you've seen so much of his acting. He's developed you've developed such a picture of him in your mind. It's amazing that he's able to, through sheer physicality, draw out these totally separate entities. Like, that's a really remarkable feat.
He gets such mileage out of lines as Evil Cooper that shouldn't be that terrifying and yet are. It's like even the line at the beginning of that scene where he's lying in the bed and he says something like, "And now food is coming." And like, I can't do it, I'm not an actor, but it's like the way that MacLachlan delivers that line is so unnerving. And you're like, why is he saying this? Who is he saying it to? What is going on?
How does he know food is coming?
Exactly. Totally freaked out. But yeah, I thought that CGI effect thing was amazing. And again, it was, for me, one of those very interesting moments in the show where, and I think it lines up with what you were talking about with this phone sequence with the sheriff calling the other sheriff on the phone, is the way in which the show is very much balancing all of these additions of new characters and like this turn towards, really primarily new characters, because the majority of the screen time on these episodes, with the exception of Kyle MacLachlan, is taken up by new actors a lot of the time. They're balancing that with still this very clear affection for the characters of the old show, even if they aren't always there, right? Like, it's like, you could read the calling Sheriff Truman as sort of like a jokey reference to old TV, and I think that's very true. But I also think it's like an acknowledgement of the fact that the audience really loves Sheriff Truman, and they're sad that he's not there, and like, we kind of wish that he was, I mean, I feel like that's true. And there's something interesting going on with the Bob appearing in Coop's face in that same kind of tension, where It's utterly terrifying. Like when I figured out what was going on, because it is almost imperceptible, right? For like the first few seconds of that effect, you're just like, what's happening to Coop's face? Like it's difficult to figure it out. And then once you figured it out, you're utterly terrified. And then you kind of get a hold of yourself and you're like, holy shit, it was amazing to see Frank Silva like appear at all, right? Like that you're happy to get this appearance of an actor who has unfortunately passed away. So there's a lot, it's an emotional roller coaster, that scene, but it's great.
I wanted to, Emily Stevens at the AV Club has been doing a really great job with her recaps. And full disclosure, I'm not like the hugest fan of the AV Club all the time, but she's been straight up killing it with the Twin Peaks write-ups and the way that she described, like, let's take a moment to acknowledge, like, if you think about the origins of Frank Silva's appearance on the original series, and then to have him be carried over into this new series through like sheer like just the magic of effects, and to have it totally work is like, it's like kiss his fingers. Like it's a beautiful thing to have happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing stuff as well, just generally going on with Evil Coop in the jail that we haven't got to yet. Like one point I wanted to bring up here, and I feel like we'll definitely keep talking about it in future episodes because it's been a pretty constant theme, is how the Evil Coop stuff ends up plugging into like the episode's overall relation to surveillance as a thing, because surveillance has been like a really common problem in all 5 episodes so far. You constantly have characters just sort of out of the blue looking up to the ceiling in different rooms to like find a camera watching them. This has happened like 3 or 4 times at least. And then in this episode, we get things like, earlier in the episode, we get kind of an amazing shot of Brett Gelman as the casino manager, standing in this casino kind of control room, and the whole back wall, this like widescreen shot, this whole back wall is all filled with, I don't know, 50 different surveillance images of the casino spread across the whole thing. And it's quite like disorienting. It's kind of amazing. And then later in this jail with Cooper, you also get this surveillance grid as Cooper arrives in this space for the phone call. And one thing that I found like super fascinating there is that the surveillance stuff, like its prevalence, its sort of weird terror about everything, it plugs into Lynch's larger kind of terror slash fascination with like recording instruments generally, and then technology like at large. So the surveillance stuff is sort of generally terrifying. And then what ends up happening in the scene with Evil Coop in the jail is that Evil Cooper is made, infinitely more terrifying for the fact that he has complete control over this surveillance. Like he is above it and outside of it and is completely able to like control it and disorient it and see it and understand it. And this gives him this like omniscience that I actually find kind of like a genius way to write an evil character for like 2017, is somebody who seems to be able to like manipulate and control electronic devices that sort of terrify and just confuse everybody else. Like I think that's great.
Maybe though it's more that he's a part of it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's like the original series, like he's literally made of electricity. And like not plain semantics, because like I think you touched on it for sure, but the idea that these kind of evil entities, which is the word that you used earlier about the different kind of personalities or personas of Kyle, it's such a great word. And to me, like in the post-industrial revolution, entities are made of electricity, because they can travel through things, they can travel into your home, and they're kind of communicating through like the like radios, television, but also like what you cook with and everything. It's like incredibly disturbing.
Wait, Justine, are you saying that Evil Cooper is part of the Internet of Things?
He is the Internet of Things.
That's an interesting
I think
idea.
That's great. It makes sense to me.
I should have made a reference to the microwave. He's in the microwaves too.
Evil Cooper is an evil microwave.
Funny that you connected Coop to the Internet of Things, because what I kept thinking of, and maybe this is because again I'm a leftist, and so I spend some of my time doing things like listening to infosec podcasts, but like this whole notion of the security state and its massive expansion. And I don't want to turn this into the Twin Peaks politics podcast. I swear to God, I'm going to keep this short. But this notion of the national security apparatus, particularly in the States, is so expanded and so omniscient that you can be, unless you take specific steps, you can be tracked, you can be monitored, you can possibly be filmed. And this notion of Bob, or Evil Coop, or whatever he is, having evolved with the times to assimilate surveillance technology feels, again, timely in a way that just sandwiches that edge, as I like to say, for some reason, of like being timely and appropriate without quite being corny and didactic. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, and no, I think that's totally right. And there's also something interesting there as well, that we continue to have like these, I guess you could say maybe sort of more old school and yet obviously hyper powerful kind of national surveillance forms in the show, right? Like we have the Pentagon on the one hand, and then we have the FBI on the other. And I actually think it's quite interesting because I've been trying to pay attention to the way that Lynch has been sort of formulating technology in these episodes. And it's like that there's two sort of concepts of technology, and they're kind of weirdly opposed. And on the one hand, it's like these devices and machines that Lynch creates that are not specific to our particular time period. They're just kind of like off, and yet they are very clearly meant to stand in as sort of like modern technology, like at the current kind of cutting edge. Like, for example, the cameras that are trained on the glass box in the opening episode, those don't look like real cameras. Those are not kind of current cameras, and yet they look like they're supposed to be very kind of technologically advanced. Same with like the different devices that Coop uses, even that kind of metal, that box that keeps getting called in this episode with the two blinking lights on it, right? Like it's a device, but it's not set to our time. And again, I actually think there's something genius about that, because it's like these episodes 20 years from now aren't going to be people looking back at them and being like, oh, look, they were all using Apple products or whatever the crap it is, right? That's one sort of side of the technology. Then the other side is like these scenarios in which they're filming computer screens, and you have these like weirdly designed interfaces, like the FBI interface and the like database of fingerprints and stuff that look so cheesy and out of date and very weird, and they all end up being associated with things like the FBI and the Pentagon and the police stations, which I find very funny. I don't know.
Yeah, whereas the Jacoby thing, even though he's using like a wind-up siren type deal, which can't believe we didn't mention. Not wind up siren, like wind up like gramophone, dictaphone type deal. Despite that, like Jacoby seems to be like interfacing with present, because he's dealing with like a very, very current media form that is like
that's true.
The YouTube like insane ranter jackass, whereas like, you know, you're right. Everyone on the security end seems to be dealing with this very like old tech. We will have to wrap up in the relatively short future, but I couldn't get through this without mentioning one of my other favorite scenes of this episode, which like I feel like the comedic aspects of the new season has been maybe the most hit or miss for me. Like the scene that I think is probably supposed to be comedic of Dougie and the woman outside the bathroom.
That's a confusing sequence.
It's an extremely confusing sequence for a lot of reasons, and I don't know how to feel about it, so I'm not going to talk about it. Maybe that's I just don't know.
You're just throwing it out there as a callback till future episodes if it returns.
Exactly. I'm feeling like, and I'm hoping like it won't. But I have to say, the sequence of the other guy in Dougie's office being handed the green tea latte.
Oh, genius.
Is the hardest I've laughed besides Wally Brando. Oh, crap. Sorry. Since you're the first guest we've had, Justine, I have to get your opinion on Wally Brando.
I am disturbed by Wally Brando. I don't know if I like it or not. But, like, I think about it. Every time I think about the new series, like, it's one of the first images that comes into my head. And I'm like, I don't know how to deal with it. Like, it's to me, it's the most disturbing thing that has happened in the whole series. I don't think it's bad. I don't know if it's good, though. I just don't know. I don't know. I don't have coherent thoughts on it. I'm not exaggerating. Like it haunts me.
Kate, for the rest of the season, can we just open every new guest segment with Wally Brando, yay or nay?
Oh, let's do it. We're making a pledge right now, listeners. We're going to remember to do that, definitely. Yeah, that is Wally Brando. I want him to come back. I'm excited. All right, okay. I have two more things I wanted to say before we wrap up. But Simon, did you have a thought you were finishing there? I can't remember before we got caught up on Wally Brando.
Knows?
Who even knows?
I mean, I wanted to marvel at the green tea latte thing, which I think was one of their best comic moments so far.
I loved that. No, the green tea, the look on that guy's face is genius. I wanted to point out just one quick thing because it's a perfect tidbit. So, as I'm sure people who are listening to this podcast have put together, there is like an amazing team of Twin Peaks people out in the world just like figuring out connections and doing all of this crazy work to like put things together. And some of it is interesting. Some of it is sort of like, well, sure, those are maybe connections or maybe they're just coincidences sort of things. But, kudos to whoever caught this and put this on the internet. The sequence where Coop is crying as he's looking at the little boy, if you go back and watch that, the footage of the little boy in at least one of the shots is backwards. The image is reversed. It's not playing forwards, it's playing backwards.
Whoa.
Because you can tell because the way that the little boy blinks is like weird. It's out of sync. You can see. Isn't that crazy? I was like, what? And I watched for it the second time, and it's totally accurate.
That's just like how in the first run of episodes we didn't talk about this, but in the interrogation sequence when Evil Coop is talking to Lynch and Ferrer, one of the varies that he says is like it's reversed. It's like
Erv or whatever. He says it backwards. Yeah.
Yeah, which we didn't talk about, but like clearly like they're doing something with reverse speech and video that, again, we don't really know what to make of yet, but worth noting.
No, I just thought that was like a really smart touch that is a very small tidbit for fans, and I thought that was very fun. The other thing I wanted to just get on the record really quickly, and it makes me laugh actually, and I say all of this in like the best spirit because when Simon and I talked about playtime on the podcast ages ago, we got a ton of feedback about that. Like, hilariously, that was like the one thing everybody wanted to write to us about, was like defending Tati against the onslaught that is us two nerds not liking Tati, which cracks me up. But anyway, so we had many interesting discussions about that. That was all good. But there was some sort of funniness happening on the internet around the most recent episodes with Dougie kind of wandering through these like modern spaces as this confused figure. And people saying, oh, isn't this interesting? It seems a lot like Tati, a lot like Monsieur Hulot of Tati fame. And for me, I just felt the need to, I had to address this at least somewhat because I do think that there are interesting connections there, certainly. I mean, I think obviously, any figure kind of bumbling around in the space of, in the face of, kind of strange modern spaces is going to read as a connection to something like Tati, and I think that's fine. But I would say that we could have a long discussion about all of the ways in which there are still very, very clear differences there that just simply don't map onto each other. The Tati stuff is so antiseptic. These modern spaces that Monsieur Hulot ends up in, it's they're all about the sort of antiseptic, blank affect, no feeling, completely replaceable spaces that he ends up in where everything looks exactly like everything else. And there's very little emotion. The characters are kind of psychological. And for Lynch, it's that's all very different. In Lynch, characters are aspsychological as well, but the universe itself is very much invested in this question of kind of human psychology and mythology and psychoanalysis almost. And then also there's no such thing as an antiseptic space in Lynch. Even these new spaces, these modern building spaces that we end up in, they're not, I don't know. It's they're certainly not like the Tati spaces. They're very lived in and odd and uncanny in a way that's quite different than what Tati is doing. But I just wanted to put this on there so now we can get 400 people writing back to us on Twitter about that. But yeah,
I just want to throw something in because I feel like I've just found my people because I don't like Tati.
Yes.
I can vaguely respect playtime just for its technical accomplishment,
yes.
But I just don't like it.
It's the Twin Peaks podcast for people who've fallen asleep watching playtime in film class.
Oh my God, Justine, that's so perfect. You definitely have found your people. This is, and people are going to be enraged. People are going to write to you now and be like, how can you not like Tati?
You're going to lose your Twitter verification.
Oh my god. Yeah. We could have a whole podcast. Maybe we should do like a bonus podcast, you guys, where the three of us sit around and talk about how David Lynch is not like Tati.
I think it's a good. We could have like an anti-Tati podcast itself, just like we could.
I'm just picturing. I don't know if you guys know what the bars look like on iTunes, when like you can see which episodes have been listened to more. I just picture like our bonus Tati episode with like half a bar.
No, but maybe it'll be the most listened to because people will hate listen.
Exactly, they're gonna rage listen to our anti-Tati podcast. Oh man!
Whatever. You can't spell Tati without tit. Screw that guy.
You can. Oh wait, you can't. I can spell.
It's a tit. Not... Oh my god, this is completely going off the rails. I'm so sorry, listeners. When I brought up the Tati thing, I that could not have predicted that that's where it would go, but I am very pleased with this turn of events.
The last thing I wanted to mention about this episode, I think, is as much as I was distracted by the Caleb Landry Jones casting, when I first saw the initial cast list, the full cast list, and saw that Amanda Seyfried was on it, I think I even said this to you, Kate, like, she struck me as such a perfect choice for, like, if there was going to be a new generation of, like, Lynchian heroine, tragic or otherwise, she seemed to be, like, a really good choice. And I think this episode bears that out. Like, she fits right in as sort of the third generation of Double R Diner people. And yeah, and that shot, obviously, of her in this drug-induced, like, euphoria is one of the most stunning of the revival so far. So I had to shout that out. I'm very curious to see if Jane Levy, who shows up for, I think, like 1 or 2 lines and about 30 seconds of screen time in this episode, I'm very curious to see if she gets more to do, because I've loved her in like several very different things.
Wait, who is this again? Which character?
Jane Levy is, if you never saw the Succumb Suburgatory or the Evil Dead remake or Don't Breathe, like, those are all like very different projects that she's been great in. And she's in the bar sequence when I guess the Horn offspring, which is another thing we haven't discussed, is the one like very like openly and disgustingly like assaulting this woman. She's sort of looking on at the other booth. Okay. And yeah, it's considering her like recent semi-prominence, it would be surprising to me if she didn't get more to do. But anyway,
I also hope we continue to get stand-up comedy from the coroner, because I enjoyed every line out of her mouth. I was like, this
Jane Addams,
genius, yeah, Jane Addams. She killed that.
Do you not recognize her?
I recognize her as the woman who played the pregnant wife in Wonder Boys, but that was from many years ago, and I probably have seen her in a million things.
She's also in Todd Solondz's Happiness.
Oh yeah,
she's in she's been omnipresent as a character actress, and yes, her scene is very funny, and she's a nice break from like let's be honest, like most of the new female people have been like pretty young things who have been terrorized in one way or another. So it's nice to get someone who's not that.
Well, I guess the one bonus of us having taken a while to get this episode organized to record is that we don't actually have to wait that long for the new episode, because I'm very excited now to see what is going to happen next week.
Yeah. Justine, was there anything else you wanted to mention before we wrapped up?
Not that I can think of. The only thing I would suggest is, if you guys really want to continue this podcast, it'd be super interesting to redo every episode of the series. I know that's like crazy, but like,
the new series,
seeing it because like when you did the original Twin Peaks podcast, like you knew what to anticipate, what was happening, that's whatever. Yeah. This one is kind of like you're thrown into the pit to figure things out. I bet a lot of what we're watching now, like in a greater context, knowing what comes next, will really change your relationship to it.
Yeah, I mean that's a great idea that we're absolutely not doing.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not sure that we'd be able to do that, but it actually is a great idea. I mean, maybe we could do like just one episode like a couple weeks later or something when we'll rewatch the series and do like a wrap up episode or something. That might be worth considering. But some of us have jobs, Justine. Jeez.
I think, don't we all have jobs?
Oh, I'm totally joking.
I know what your callback is.
Oh, Twitter. Anyway, thanks to everyone for listening. I always mean to do this at the top of the show, and then I always forget, and that's why we can't have nice things. Please rate and review the show on iTunes, because it means a lot to us, and especially to Kate. And so far we have yet. Okay, no, actually. Yeah, okay, I'm going to just mention I'm tempting fate, but we have yet to get a review from any country that wasn't a 5-star review on iTunes. So please don't break our streak, all right? But we would appreciate more, and we always appreciate constructive feedback. Mm-hmm. And we hope that this hasn't been totally... I saw the ticker going a little long on the time for this, but considering it was a little bit late, and considering how long you've had to wait for a new episode, I thought it would be okay to go a little long, even though I'm screwing myself for editing. So I hope you appreciate my sacrifice as I watch those seconds tick by, and then my future seconds tick away, as I know those are seconds I'm going to have to process. But I'm just making it worse as I'm describing the problem to you, so I'm going to stop talking. Thank you, Justine, for joining us. You're on Twitter at Red Room Rantings. You are verified and with good reason, so congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate your praise.
Soon that swag's gonna be rolling in. Hey, Justine, swag everywhere.
I want so much swag.
You should try to get some of Lynch's coffee.
I would love, send me, if you have coffee, send it.
Just getting random bags of coffee from people in the mail. I love it. Do it.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna make this happen.
But not Starbucks coffee. You're a former barista, so not that shit.
I'll take it.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Cinnament, Cinement. And
yes.
You can find me on Twitter at HollowMinds, spelled like it sounds. And thanks to Sorted Cinema /Goombastomp for hosting this podcast. You can find us there. And, of course, on iTunes, etc. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in hopefully a little bit less than a week. Boom!
Yeah. All right, stop.